Hello, everyone. We have a great panel here to talk about AI governance more broadly beyond Congress. I'm going to let my panelists introduce themselves, maybe give a line or two on how you use AI in your job or how it applies to your job currently, and then we can go from there. And start with you.
Thank you. Elham Tabassi. I lead the Trustworthy Responsible AI program at NIST. I have been with National Institute of Standards and Technology since 1999, working on various machine learning and computer vision programs, applications in biometrics, and we just recently released the AI RMF that I think we'll be talking about it today. Thanks for having me.
My name is Bertram, Senior Policy Counsel for Data, Decision Making, and Artificial Intelligence with the Future of Privacy Forum. I'm looking at AI regulation across the globe at both the state and global level. And yeah, that's my daily use of AI, I guess.
Evangelos Razis. Seems to be off. Can you hear me? Evangelos Razis with Workdayr. We are an enterprise software as a service company providing enterprise financial management, human resources, and planning software to over half the Fortune 500. I am the US AI Policy Engagement Lead.
My name is Michael Richards. I'm a policy director at the Chamber Technology Engagement Center within the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. My day-to-day job is to lead an AI working group of 300 plus members, as well as look at state and local, as well as federal policy.
Thank you. I think we will start with the NIST framework. It kind of came out just in time a little bit ago when everybody was really talking about generative AI and how it applies to their life. I think some people were surprised to know that NIST had actually been working on this for a while. So can we talk about the framework and why NIST put this together and how it sort of came about and how you see it fitting into this very current conversation about AI?
Sure, happy to. To your question about why NIST is working on this, NIST has a very broad portfolio of research and a long-standing tradition of cultivating trust in technology. And we do that by advancing measurement science, advancing technical standards that make technology more robust, secure, private, in other words, more trustworthy. And that's exactly what we're doing in the area of AI through our foundational research, but also, as I said, NIST has a very broad portfolio of research. So our scientists also using AI as a scientific discovery in their research. So we get to see how AI is being used and also work on foundational concepts of what constitutes trust and what trustworthy AI looks like. About the AI RMF, AI Risk Management Framework, directed by a congressional mandate, AI RMF is a voluntary framework for managing the risk of AI systems in a flexible, structured, and measurable way. Flexible to, first and foremost, allow for innovation to happen, but also allow for different organizations with different level of resources be able to adopt it and use it. Structured in terms of that it starts by trying to provide some sort of a lexicon, unified lexicon and vocabulary about what's AI system, what's the risk of AI systems, how the risk of AI systems differs from the risk of any other information or data systems. And with that, sort of lays out why another framework is needed for managing the risk of AI systems. And it's measurable, and that's really near and dear to our heart, because if you cannot measure it, you cannot improve it. So if you really want to improve the trustworthiness of AI systems, any approach for risk management, any approach for understanding the trustworthiness should also provide methodology for how to measure trustworthiness. It adopts a rights-preserving approach and provides and outlines processes for understanding and measuring traditional measures such as validity, reliability, accuracy, but also importantly acknowledge socio-technical characteristics such as privacy, interpretability, transparency, security, bias, and outlines processes for understanding and managing them. These characteristics are tied to human behavior, and they cannot be summarized into a single number and be measured with a single threshold. It was released on January 26. Very quickly to answer your questions about generative AI. Of course, the ChatGPT, the release of ChatGPT in November captured a lot of attention across the media and everywhere. But a lot of us in the AI field were aware of these things, were aware of this generative AI systems, and we were thinking about this. Very quickly, AI RMF, the way it defines AI systems, the definition is definitely applicable to generative AI. It was by design. It was something that we had our eyes on it. And the second thing is that a risk-based approach is a very powerful approach. And if it's done correctly, it's also flexible to allow for all of these different innovations that happen. Well, granted, understanding the risk profile of a generative AI, such as ChatGPT, is going to be a lot more complicated and complex of a risk profile of a deep neural net, which is more complicated and complex than a logistic regression. But at the end, what's important is to have a structured way of understanding risk, a good taxonomy of risks and methods and for measuring them. If I have time, I just want to say a few words about AI RMF has been developed in an open, transparent, collaborative process. It started with a request for information, rounds of workshops, rounds of draft for public comments, and in the span of 18 months, we heard from more than 240 organizations, received more than 600 sets of comments, and the outreach and engagement was from tech community to civil society to legal scholars. On our team, we consulted with psychologists and sociologists. We have cognitive scientists on our team because, again, AI systems is all about context, and risk management cannot be done without understanding the context and from the socio-technical lens and approach.
Thank you so much. I was going to ask you about generative AI and the framework, so thank you for addressing that. My next question is for you three. AI is obviously rapidly advancing. How do you perceive the state of governance today in your organizations in this AI landscape? How are you perceiving how you're using AI and thinking about AI right now? And we could start with Bertram.
So I think what we do at Future Privacy Forum is really find the nuance and really just kind of describe where the law and technology meet and where there is not clear clarity. We try to provide best practices and guide firms and organizations with the help of civil society, academics, and other organizations to be able to build forward as to how to make these technologies safer. How to build them in context with data privacy protection principles, how to ensure that civil and human rights are part of the conversation, and how to make sure that they're workable. And I think from that perspective, what we're seeing right now in the governance space is that with the EU AI Act kind of moving forward, we're also seeing states really lead the way. There are a number of proposals both in Connecticut, California, with the New York AI law. I think there's one in Oregon, if I'm not mistaken. Don't quote me on that. But there are a number of proposals that are coming out that are asking AI or that are asking organizations that use AI to be more transparent. And I think transparency is going to be the next big wave within AI regulation. Can you cite your work? Can you show your work? Are you willing to have somebody open up and say, this is how we did testing. This is how we did risk management. This is how we do bias testing. These are all the things that are so incredibly important because the scale of these decisions is what I think scares regulators, policymakers, and people so much. The ability of AI to make thousands and thousands, if not millions of decisions that are really consequential to the lives of people every single day is the thing that has a lot of people really wanting to regulate this space. And honestly, organizations that we talk to want regulation as well. They just want to make sure that regulation is in line with how they're using the tool, in line with risk, and in line with how these concepts and in line with their legal liability as it stands right now. And so all of those things are like, it's a massive dance right now, but it's moving forward in a particular direction at this moment.
Evangelos?
So I think John put it very well earlier, which is these are very complicated issues, and I think folks are figuring out what is the art of the possible at the same time that, clearly the AI technology is moving at a certain pace, and how can policymakers act in a way that builds trust? And really that's sort of the foundational framework in which Workday views a lot of these AI policy conversations. How do we advance trust? How do we enable responsible innovation? And I think we've seen quite a bit of interest on policymakers, I think as Bertram had mentioned, at the state level, obviously here in DC, and then internationally. In terms of what specifically I think is within that realm of the possible, it's accounting for the really maturing state of AI governance. Clearly we have the NIST framework, which is really an important step forward in terms of how do organizations operationalize trustworthy AI. But technical standards are very much still in development. And so what are you looking at in terms of at a very practical level for organizations when it comes to implementing trustworthy AI? A lot of that's still being written. A lot of that foundational work is happening now. And so we try to be constructive partners with policymakers, recognizing the need to do something, recognizing the need to move the ball forward. And for us, I think we arrive at AI impact assessments, which I know is sort of a key subject of the panel, differentiating between the different roles in the marketplace that companies play. And then, of course, taking a risk-based approach, which will make sure that we are focused on the use cases that present consequential risk to users, and also aligns us with the EU AI Act, which is certainly a key priority for us.
Yeah, so us at the U.S. Chamber, so first, PricewaterhouseCoopers put out a study a few years ago that showed that AI has the potential for a $13 trillion increase in GDP globally. But on top of that, we recently did some polling which showed that small businesses are planning on utilizing AI at a 27% increase within the next year. So within the business community, this is going to happen. People are utilizing artificial intelligence, and we need to make sure that the use of AI is going to be trustworthy and developed in a way which mitigates potential issues around it, so that the society and in general, we all have trust within the utilization of it. So we've taken that first and foremost as our approach to this. And how do we go through that process in working with our companies and members to develop trustworthy AI, be it providing comment back to the risk management framework, be it other things that are happening within the federal government, state government as well. But on top of just saying things, the U.S. Chamber actually decided to actually do more than that. So about a little over a year ago, we put together the U.S. Chamber Commission on AI, two former members of Congress, John Delaney from Maryland, Mike Ferguson from New Jersey, as well as a group of people from academia, business community, as well as groups such as Brookings Institute, AEI, et cetera, to come around and actually go around the United States and globally to actually look at this issue as far as recommendations, regulations, and ways in which we can approach. And actually, I'm happy to actually share with everyone in this panel, as well as in the outside, that those recommendations are actually going to be coming out this upcoming Thursday. And we look forward to sharing that with everybody and looking for a bipartisan approach to developing a way forward around this.
So this will be the Chamber's sort of principles and guidelines on AI for businesses?
So this is actually not the Chamber's. I can't say that this is, the Chamber funded this as a thought leadership process, but this is more about having a bipartisan way of approaching things, that we saw that this being so important that it was necessary to bring together everybody to allow this to come out.
I have a question for Bertram. So with what you've seen come out so far, with the NIST framework and the AI principles from the White House, what's your perception on how well they're addressing diversity, inclusion, any worries about how AI can disproportionately discriminate against people of color and women? Are we addressing these things in a good way so far, and where does more work need to be done?
So I would say that there are a couple things that folks need to keep in mind. One, the laws that are on the books right now apply to AI as well, right? So whether you're talking about the context of civil rights laws, Title VII, Title VI, whether you're talking about the Fair Housing Act, whether you're talking about ECOA, FCRA, ADEA, ADA, right? These are all just like a smattering of them. There's more, right? These all apply currently to organizations, to firms right now. What there isn't really, though, is a great way of thinking about how these tools and how do you test these tools in a way that's equitable. And so, for example, I'll give you the example of there are different communities have different context about how they want their data used and how that data should be tested. Also, what is the correct test? Are we talking about 4/5 rule? Are we doing statistical significance, right? These are things that regulators need to kind of like coalesce around. And there also needs to be a way to think about what is a privacy protective way in order to test for disparate impact across a litany of communities. And how do we ensure that that data is accurate? And how do we make sure that that data actually coalesces around these communities and makes it so that we can do this in a way that is consistent, that is protective of rights, but also is actually doable for companies and for firms across the board. And so that's a conversation that I think is missing right now, and that like I think civil society, us at Future Privacy Forum, folks within industry are all trying to have these conversations around where to move those things. And then I think right now there is a real heavy emphasis on bias, but there is not as much about testing and about data. And I think that those conversations are just as important, right? Because in order to figure out how AI is being biased, how AI is potentially discriminating, right? You need to be able to have the right data set, whether that's synthetic or created, right? What do you do? How do people sign up to be part of those data sets? How do people make sure that they're not? All of those things are complicated conversations that we're looking forward to having moving forward.
And is your organization sort of developing best practices, or are you talking to lawmakers or NIST specifically about things you would watch out for or providing guidance there?
Absolutely. I mean, I think we talk to organizations a lot about best practices. We're developing those around HR and AI, working with a few folks in here as well, working with Evangelos on those. And so what we're trying to do is figure out what are the best ways to kind of like have organizations or engage in best practices around AI, and also like what are some of the best recommendations that we can have around these tools and principles. And that is going to manifest itself in a lot of different ways, but you know, coming from civil society, I'm going to lean towards that direction because those are the people who I worked with, but also folks in industry as well, and also with policymakers as well.
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me of the Section 230 debate in other instances where you're not really sure how far the law goes in impacting people until you see a lawsuit or you see something unfold in court. So are you looking to sort of get ahead of that and decide how our current laws apply to AI sort of before you're, just dealing with a lawsuit, and that's kind of your only example to look at?
Well, I think it depends on who you ask, right? If you ask the civil rights groups whether the law applies, they're going to extend it to what they envision, not only the letter of the law, but the spirit of the law as well, right? If you ask firms, depending on the firms in the high-risk area or not, they're going to kind of limit that to what the court has actually said. But there's a lot of space in between where there's agreement. And that's what I think we're finding more and more, is that folks want to do the right thing. Folks want to engage in these processes and be active stakeholders in there and make sure that their products are not discriminating against particular communities or large swaths of communities, because the future of America is one that is a multiracial coalition. And if you're discriminating against your potential future users, potential future clients, right, that's bad business practice. And I think firms across, all the firms that I've talked to about this completely agree with that notion and want to be as inclusive as humanly possible.
Absolutely. So for Evangelos, the NIST framework is voluntary. It's not compulsory by law to follow it. So I know Workday has been really involved in sort of crafting these, and you guys are excited to sort of adopt the guidelines. Other sort of mid-sized companies are excited to adopt these guidelines, but they're voluntary. So how do you get the bigger companies excited to sort of look at the NIST framework and say, hey, maybe we should be following some of these principles? How do you get the whole sector to sort of adopt, at least in spirit, some of these guidelines when it's not in law?
Yeah, I would say let's start with looking at NIST's greatest hits, almost like a good band. We start with the cybersecurity framework and the privacy framework.
Yeah.
These have influenced best-in-class governance programs for both those respective fields. They're very widely respected, in part because NIST runs such an open and transparent process, and because of its technical expertise. And so when you describe to a lot of folks who understand these governance issues, you never usually have to spell out what NIST means. They're familiar with the organization and its products. And so, look, I think part of it is being able to sell the utility of this. It is a very practical how-to guide for organizations. For us, it has influenced and will continue to influence how we think about AI governance. And I think in many ways, the utility of it is going to make it, it's not exactly a difficult sell. And so I think part of it is just education, being able to speak to others about why this is such a valuable tool, how it does advance trustworthiness in AI. And then, again, like any good sort of stakeholder process, invite folks to the table, allow them to share their best practices in how they're using it. And I think the ambition here is, like the cybersecurity framework, seeing the AI framework become the common language in which we're thinking about AI. Because I think, Bertram, as you mentioned so eloquently, I think there's a lot of discussions right now around AI. There's a desire to come together around common concerns, trying to craft common ways forward, and I think we certainly see the NIST framework as that potential common language because it's already been done in other fields. Michael,
do you have any thoughts on that, given that you're in touch with companies often?
So, I mean, on top of the large companies, I think as, Evangelos was saying that, they're already looking to utilize this, they're already going through the process. I think a lot of other large companies that I've talked to are doing the same thing, to be completely honest with you. I think really where one of the efforts that needs to be done is actually on the small and medium size, as well as the C-suite executives, because that's really where you're going to change hearts and minds. One, small businesses, they don't have the resources. To be completely frank with you, they don't have a legal department to look at this and see how they're utilizing it, track it and look at where they are in their AI life cycle to really go through it. But there needs to be this understanding and lexicon as we were just talking about these issues, and have that, the right questions to ask to go through the process, which is something that RMF does a very, very good job about doing. But I think there needs to be also this opportunity for a continued dialogue around it. I think that this is what NIST is doing right now, be it the playbook, as well as the upcoming profiles. This is 1.0 is the best way I like to say it, is not the end of this. It's a living document. It's going to continually be discussed and worked on. And for us, the U.S. Chamber, we look forward to continuing to work with them.
Mm-hmm. I want to talk about Europe for a little bit. So the AI Act is soon going to go into effect in Europe. Sort of from a high level, how is everyone sort of comparing the U.S. approach so far and what Europe is doing? What are the major differences and similarities? And we can start with you.
Okay, thank you for all of the kind words about the AI RMF. That's really good. And yes, we're committed to work on the profiles and implementation.
And what are these profiles you're talking about?
So AI RMF by design is a framework, right? It's technology, use case agnostic, and of course law and regulation agnostic because we are non-regulatory. At the same time, I said it, and you all agree that AI is all about context. So if I want to do risk management for an AI systems that look at a scan of the brain image and this makes some predictions or diagnosis on the image will be different than how we use AI in hiring or how we use AI in different things. So profiles are going to be verticals or tailored set of guidance of the AI RMF for particular use cases. And that is, again, goes back to some of this flexibility that we said we built in. So the AI RMF is, and you ask about the voluntary nature of this, but it already had brought community on a shared understanding of what we mean by AI risks and provide that common lexicon and language, which is, I think, the first step on whatever else we want to do. First, we want to know what is we're talking about.
Okay.
About the EU, their approach is also a risk-based approach, but there are similarities and differences among the two approaches. Trade and Technology Council, it was one of the deliverables that came out on December 5 was a joint AI roadmap, which is focused on understanding the similarities, understanding the gap, and figure out what can be done over the two sides of the Atlantic to understand those gaps and get to bridge the gap to the extent possible. In the AI RMF, we have also provided some crosswalks. One of those crosswalks talks about how the trustworthiness characteristics in the AI RMF maps to or relate to the concepts in the EU AI Act, but also OECD AI recommendation. We try to leverage all of the work that has been done. You said that it's going to come to effect really soon. Really soon is a little bit objective term. It's still some way ahead. My personal belief is that regardless of the regulatory and policy landscape, having good, solid, scientifically valid, technically solid international standards that talk about risks, that talk about risk management, talk about trustworthiness, can be a good backbone and a common ground for all of these regulations and policy discussions. And that is our job, that is NIST's job, to provide those type of technical contribution to the table for conversation.
Happy to weigh in. I think a lot of what Elham said is so important because it enables technical interoperability between the emerging approach here in the US and the AI Act. Workday has been watching the AI Act very closely, engaging, again, trying to be constructive and building bridges between what is happening in Europe and obviously sort of the emerging AI governance approach here in the US. The importance of standards here, I think it's important maybe just to kind of dig in a little bit, and this is what differentiates us from the Europeans. The Europeans can legislate, and generally when they say they're going to legislate, there is legislation.
They really mean it.
There will be an AI Act, we know that for certain. And so they will then turn to their standards development organizations and ask them to fill in the blanks. That is generally not how the US has approached technical standards. There is a more market-driven or sort of bottoms-up approach to standards development. And so there's a lot of interest in, once the AI Act is enacted into law, getting those standards in place at a time when a lot of this is being built from the ground up. I think this has sort of been a challenge as we sort of view in the US in terms of, again, what is the art of the possible in advancing AI in a way that recognizes that those technical standards are still in development. And so it's one of the reasons why we're so much in favor of impact assessments, because they don't rely on technical standards, even though I think, as Elham put, good standards will always be helpful in terms of good organizational practices. And so this is certainly a space that we're watching. We think there's a lot of potential in the AI Act to become a global benchmark. I mean that positively. And certainly we're watching the space very closely and eagerly seeing the good work coming out of the TTC.
Either of you want to address Europe?
I think one of the things that gets missed in the conversation between US and Europe is that while there are differences in how we think about bias and how we think about, we use the term marginalized communities in the US. In the EU, they use the term vulnerable communities, and there are different standards in which they kind of constitute those. But if you look at kind of the totality of civil rights law that I basically blurted out previously, and also the EU Human Rights Convention and the UN Convention on Human Rights, they map almost the same. Not perfect one-to-one, but mostly they map on pretty similarly when it comes to protected classes. And so that also kind of manifests itself in how the EU AI Act thinks about high-risk activity. Again, not perfect, but it's almost a one-to-one about what you currently cannot do within the context of the US when it comes to what activities we think of as protected. They're in different laws, they may be in different standards, they're not necessarily all considered quote-unquote high-risk activity. They're covered by a millage or a deluge of laws, right? But though they're very similar. And so I think there's not as much of a delta in between how we think about this. And I think that's something that we miss in this conversation as well.
Yeah, the one thing I would add to this is actually, look, the U.S. Chamber has a lot of concerns regarding the EU AI Act and its current state. But the one thing they did get right is risk-based. Where something that we're seeing right now in the United States is the ADPPA, the American Data Privacy Protection Act, and specifically Section 207, is really not a risk-based approach. They put consequential risk in there, but that is a defined term for FTC to define, not actually Congress. We would ask Congress to define that term so that we make sure, as well as the requirement to submit impact assessments through that provision is actually a may for the FTC, not a shall for actual risk-based.
So impact assessments, that's addressed in the ADPPA, as you just said. What exactly, in very simple terms, is a risk assessment, and how does it apply to an AI application? Anybody who wants to answer? Go ahead.
I cited it enough times, so I'm on the hook
Yes.
to define it. So an impact assessment is a tool to help organizations identify, document, and this is an important document, and address risks associated with technology. And so it is, notice I didn't use the word AI in that definition because they're already used in other contexts like data protection or privacy. Under GDPR, for example, you're required to carry out a data protection impact assessment. Under several state laws, it is required to carry out a privacy impact assessment of some form, although the requirements differ from depending on the state. And so it is a very valuable tool to help organizations take a holistic view of the technology before it goes into the marketplace or before it is used. So we think it's a really valuable approach to address some of the risks around AI, a necessary step forward as a lot of the technical standards are being developed. I will give a shout out. So we released a paper along with Axios Partnership on the role of impact assessments. And for those who have maybe seen our little card, there's a QR code where you can get access to that and learn more.
And when it comes to impact assessments, just to kind of like address two things at once. One, I think 207 actually works as a public accommodation space. We currently have that in law as well. Businesses already have to comply with public accommodations laws, and as it stands right now, 207 is more of a digital public accommodations law. And that is, I think, important to keep in context because it reminds businesses and it reminds firms that you have to include everyone in how you design tools and make sure that you're not discriminating, or at least attempt to not discriminate. And impact assessments are a way in which to codify that. Here's what we're trying to do. Here's how we're thinking about it. Here's how we're trying to at least address some of these issues. And I think 207 at ADPA does that. And I think where impact assessments start is that we're developing technical standards right now. We're working towards that, but there isn't necessarily a common language that we have quite yet. Mm-hmm. Then as we develop that, let's at least try. It's the same context of like, let us try to get these things right. Let us try to get, be as inclusive as we possibly can, as kind of like was stated earlier. Like this is an administration priority. Be as inclusive in the economy as humanly possible. It makes all of us stronger. And that's the context of technology, allowing us to actually buy into the idea and the concept that all of us collectively, when we work together and we all have access to these tools, we can build a better and greater thing, build a better and greater society, build a better and greater internet, build better and greater tools, right? That's all 207 is trying to do in that context, and I think that impact assessment piece is so critical for that. And so like when, at a previous role, when we were working on that section, that was the whole concept behind it. And I think that there is, pushback against it, and I think that some of it's valid, but I think the broad context of what that pushback comes from is not necessarily from the public accommodations or the broader kind of context of like allowing more people inside of the technology, allowing more people to participate in the digital economy. It's about how we do it. Mm-hmm. And so like as we're working forward, let's make sure that we keep that in mind, that we want everyone to be able to participate in this new digital economy. And that's like, I think, a really key point for not only policymakers, but it's true in the EU, it's true in South America, it's becoming true in the APAC region, it's going to be true in Africa. The whole world understands that concept. And let's not be the one who lags behind as America.
If I can very quickly underscore something really important that Evangelos and Bertram, you several times point to that. The importance of assessments, but also the importance of having a good understanding of what to measure and how to measure. Metrics, methodologies, test data that can do that. And I think that is something that, particularly from the socio-technical angle, is a challenge for the whole tech and science and research community. I usually say that for an agency of 120 years of history of running benchmark and evaluations, we have perfected the art and science of technical evaluations and technology evaluations. But when it comes from measuring technology from the viewpoint of, is it working for everybody? Is AI systems benefiting all people in equitable, responsible, fair way? There is major technical challenges that I think a lot of really good scientists and research community is working on that, and I think that's something really important.
So let me ask you just sort of about a real-world example right now. Microsoft released Bing's ChatGPT, sort of not to the public, to a select amount of Bing users and on a rolling basis. And their point of view going into that was, hey, maybe this isn't fully ready yet, but we really want to see how people are using it, the sort of feedback they're getting, some of the flaws people are pointing out. That helps us learn. That helps us make the product better. Now, on first impression, I wouldn't think that's like a traditional, impact assessment exercise. That seems a little different to me. Is that an example of that? Is that a little more public than these should be? How do you feel about that approach, compared to what you guys just described, which is obviously a very methodical, sort of rolled out thing?
So I won't comment on Microsoft or Microsoft technology, or I might end up complaining about Teams. But
we can't have that.
I will say this goes a little bit back toward kind of the risk-based approach and why I think ChatGPT has interested so many in AI governance, which is we're talking about sort of a use case specific approach to focusing resources, attention by organizations, by government and policymakers on specific uses of a tool. And I think some of the questions that have arisen around ChatGPT has been broader, non-use case specific applications of AI. And
is that because people are sort of just throwing stuff at it and seeing how it responds, and not really any uniform way?
That is a good question. I myself am still I think trying to understand the implications of it, but yeah. I think Elham put it well, which is you can still use tools that we're talking about now to try to understand and address the risks associated with any AI technology, including specific use cases of generative AI.
The AIRMF put a lot of emphasis on test evaluation, verification, and validation. And also talks about risk management being a shared responsibility across the whole life cycle of AI, which also talks about life cycle. In the guidance that it provides and in the playbook, talks specifically about the role of designers, developer, deployers, tester, along all of these lines. And again, evaluation and measurement are extremely important. Is exactly where the rubber hits the road on understanding risks and doing the risk management. It's important when this type of testing is being done that the impacted community are identified, so that the magnitude of the impact can also be measured. Evangelos talks about participatory design, making sure that there is an inclusive reach to the people that get the test, that are involved in whatever the role of the AI actor is. So it cannot be overemphasized, the importance of doing the right verification and validation before putting this type of products out. When they are out with all of their risks there, right? So the things that we just put it out and tested as people are using it is not a very good risk-based approach.
Yeah, I don't think sort of letting people use it and see what happens is exactly what you guys have in mind as a best practice. We can end here on China. A lot of lawmakers seem to be motivated by this idea that we need to regulate AI with our American principles to keep up with China. So is that a good motivator? Is that how lawmakers should be thinking about this? And how are you guys thinking about sort of the global competition aspect here, especially with China? And we can start with you.
Sure. Obviously, China has their 2030 plan, and they have stated that be it standardization, be it AI regulation, be it everything they want to be a part of, and they want to lead in by 2030. So obviously, it's something that our policymakers are looking at and have to address. I think that this would be another great opportunity for me to plug the AI Commission's report that's coming out this Thursday that actually has a national security piece to it. And I think that those would provide lawmakers something to go off of as far as starting principles around it.
Thank you.
I think your question speaks to getting the balance right, which is how do we address these issues of public concern in a meaningful way while also enabling responsible innovation and enabling companies that want to do the right thing and are doing the right thing to do so. And so I think certainly that question draws it into starker light. I also think it speaks to the importance of having consistent policymaking. There are certainly concerns around, as we've seen in privacy, states acting. I think there are some concerns around a patchwork and around inconsistent requirements between different states, as well as here in DC. And so having, again, a kind of common language, common way of thinking about AI and addressing those issues of public trust without unduly burdening responsible innovation.
Okay, any thoughts?
I think I would just say that the strength of what we do is when we include more people inside of the process and in ensuring that our tools work for as many people as possible. If we're talking about kind of like the global AI context, making sure our AI actually does work for the globe. The globe is not full of white people. The globe is full of a multiracial coalition of humans who are trying to engage and participate in the digital economy in a varying context. Ensuring that our AI works for the world is critical. And in doing so, that means protecting human rights, that means protecting civil rights, that means doing testing, that means thinking about fairness, that means thinking about how we frame up our responsible risk management practices. Those are all critical in order to keep us at the highest level of competition, because that's how Silicon Valley started. It started in the Bay because of the diverse array of people who were around there. And also it helped fuel and funnel the digital economy and fuel technology as we know it right now.
Do you have anything to add?
I'll just take it back to the AI-RMF and say that the ultimate goal, the bigger goal of the AI-RMF, as I said, is to cultivate trust in technology, is to operationalize values in the technology, design and build technologies that are reflective of the values of our society. And we don't want this to be an after fact. We want this proactive thinking about how to build technologies that are reflective of our values and work for all people, again, in an equitable, responsible, fair way as part of the design development of technology.
Thank you. Well, thanks to all of you for a great and fascinating conversation. With that, that's our time. So thanks for tuning in.